Ali, you were born in Armenia. Tell me the town name again.
I was born and raised in Armenia. Today, very few people outside of Azerbaijan know that in Armenia there were Azerbaijanis living until 1989.
So do you believe that the Azerbaijani should return to Armenia or the Armenians return to Azerbaijan as part of this reconciliation project?
There are a lot of problems that should be resolved before coming to that point.
How do you evaluate Prime Minister Pashinyan's course to grant Armenian nationality to the Karabakh Armenians? Do you agree with this approach? Hello again and welcome. I'm Dr. Joanne Lisosky, journalist and journalism educator. Today we are joined by Ali Asgarli, Azerbaijani American scholar from North Carolina, to discuss the latest dynamics in the South Caucasus. Ali, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Looking at the latest developments, do you think for the first time in a very long time, Azerbaijan and Armenia may be on the same page? Or do you worry about what President Aliyev says, quote, we should be ready to defend ourselves? Is he referring to Armenia when he says that?
Both Armenia and Azerbaijan, they are nation states, and they should be ready always to defend themselves. But I don't think Aliyev's expression is against Armenia. It's mostly against Russia, because Azerbaijan right now has serious problems with Russia rather than Armenia. What is the problem? As you know, Pashinyan came to power in 2018, and since then Pashinyan has been trying hard to make Armenia truly independent. Armenia is dependent on Russia on security issues, on economic matters, etc. Armenia has had serious problems with Azerbaijan, with Turkey, etc. And that's why we never could say that Armenia was really fully independent. So Pashinyan is trying to make Armenia truly independent. So does Aliyev today, trying to take Azerbaijan out of the Russian influence. And Russia doesn't like that. Russia tried to punish Pashinyan, Armenia under Pashinyan, tried to oust Pashinyan out of office, and did a lot helping Pashinyan's opposition, etc. And in the Second Karabakh War, Russia refrained from giving support to Pashinyan as well, just because of that, because Pashinyan's orientation is pro-European, pro-Western. And today, Aliyev is in the same situation. He is trying to take Azerbaijan out of Russia's sphere of influence, and Russia doesn't like that. So that's why I believe Aliyev means by saying that Azerbaijan should defend itself against Russia. Is Azerbaijan ready? This is another question, of course.
Are we talking about economic, diplomatic, people-to-people exchanges? Do you see that cooperation possibly happening between Armenia and Azerbaijan?
You see, the problems between Armenia and Azerbaijan are deep-rooted, and they are to some extent, I can say, protracted, but not necessarily we can say that they are not resolvable. They are resolvable, of course, but it's going to take a lot of time. This conflict started in 1988. Before that, the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict had its history. In fact, it started in early 19th century. So see, it has a history like longer than 100 years, a century-long conflict. You cannot resolve it instantaneously. You need some time, and you have to have a program. You have to revolutionize your people. They should be ready for the normalization of relations, etc. But we can see it at different levels. First of all, top level, that's between governments, okay? So the government of Armenia and the government of Azerbaijan, they have a kind of program and they are ready to move forward. How about mid-level leadership? Say, for example, community leaders, religious leaders, etc. They should be ready. And then it comes to grassroots. People should be ready. So Azerbaijan more or less is ready to that. Armenia is not today. Like 10 years ago, Armenia was ready to that. Azerbaijan was not. Why? Because the situation was different. So that's why it's very hard to explain to Armenian people certain truths. Pashinyan is trying to explain all this to its population, saying that, hey, you know what? We have to change our mindset. First of all, our mentality should be changed. The world, everybody is developing and making progress, and we just got stuck here. So we have to change our mentality. That's why what I see, there is progress. The Armenian government is working hard, but despite the fact that Pashinyan is an elected and democratic leader of Armenia, he has a lot of challenges. Why? Because Pashinyan's ideas are not acceptable by many circles in Armenia, like the church, like the nationalistic circles, like ANCA, which is the diaspora organization of Armenians, like certain segment of Armenian military. All these are manipulated by Russia, by Putin. Putin is trying to manipulate them, organize them against Pashinyan. That's why I can say that Pashinyan is really vulnerable to Russia, to its opposition, political opposition. They have to integrate. If Armenia wants to survive in the region, it should integrate into the regional economy and normalize its relations with especially Turkey and Azerbaijan. What does it mean? Like in Armenia, frequently they speak about new allies of Armenia, like France. And they say, hey, if anything happens, France not going to come to Armenia to defend us. Hey, you know that. Then they speak about a potential ally, the US. But then they say that, hey, it's hardly believable that if anything happens, US going to come to the region to fight on our side against Azerbaijan. Then they mention Russia. And you see, if you keep being dependent on Russia, you're never going to get your independence in its fullest sense. Then what should you do? You should really resolve your problems with your neighbors. Who are your neighbors, main neighbors? You have only 4 neighbors, and 2 major neighbors are Turkey and Azerbaijan. Then what should you do? You should normalize your relations with Turkey and Azerbaijan. You should really sign a very strong treaty with both of them, get security guarantees. And then you are trying to make Armenia, for example, this is an example, a transportation hub. How can you make Armenia a transportation hub without resolving your problems with Turkey and Azerbaijan? Armenia is a small country. And then you're going to start trade, right? And all these are economic integration. So politically, you have to normalize your relations with Turkey and Azerbaijan, and then start little by little to integrate your economy into the regional economy. See what happened in 1990s. Azerbaijan, Turkey, and Georgia primarily had a number of huge economic, I would say, projects that Armenia was left outside. So one of them is Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline, and then gas pipeline, and then Baku-Tbilisi Kars Railroad, etc. All these, Armenia should be part of all these, And in the future, Armenia should use its territory for economic purposes, and this is going to help Armenia to flourish. That's why it's better to cooperate than be in conflict forever. So conflict never helps any government, any state, any nation. Everybody gains, but maybe at varying degrees. One may gain, say, 40%, another one 60%. That's acceptable, but everybody gonna be a winner. So Pashinyan understands this, Aliyev understands this. They want to make their nations truly independent and drive away Russia out of Caucasus, and then really be independent, have strong treaty, and then get that treaty ratified in their parliaments, and that's new era in the Caucasus. This is what we expect, but can they do this? We don't know.
How is this new era going to come if Armenia and Azerbaijan never really move out of Russia's orbit? How is that going to happen?
That's the main problem. One of the main.
How do you suggest they do that?
That's why they came to the White House. Most likely, they asked Trump. They said, "Hey, there is an imminent danger of Russia. Russia likes to rule and divide and rule all the former Soviet republics, and Russia sees us as its backyard, and we need your help. It's the US can help. It's not Turkey, it's not Israel. They are not enough. They are Azerbaijan's allies, but they are not enough." That's the United States of America. And most likely Trump said, "Don't worry." But you know what the reality is? The reality is that Russia right now is weak because of the war in Ukraine. And that's the reason that Russia really kept quiet. Probably they did calculations, and Russia does not believe in its own power right now. Otherwise, Russia would probably try to punish Azerbaijan differently. So if Armenia and Azerbaijan both receive support from the United States, then they can preserve their independence and get out of Russia's influence, etc. Most likely, America wants to get out of that something, and they promised the U.S. to surveil the Zengezur corridor or Zengezur Road or Trump Road. Most likely, they spoke about certain details that we don't know. But again, without the help of the United States, neither Azerbaijan nor Armenia can survive, can get out of Russia's influence. That's very important. So they need external allies that should really be impartial in terms of Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict, support both of them, and Armenia-Azerbaijan should agree between themselves that they also should cooperate, and that's the key to success.
So I've got another question for you, Ali. You were born in Armenia. Tell me the town name again.
I was born and raised in Armenia. Today, very few people outside of Azerbaijan know that in Armenia there were Azerbaijanis living until 1989.
So do you believe that the Azerbaijani should return to Armenia or the Armenians return to Azerbaijan as part of this reconciliation project?
See, that's a good point, but probably there are a lot of problems that should be resolved before coming to that point. But okay. I'll tell you this now, in Armenia before 1989, there were about 300,000 Azerbaijanis living there. Armenia was afraid, and still is afraid, most Armenians, that if Azerbaijanis come back to Armenia, they're gonna claim for autonomy, they're gonna claim certain political rights. Of course, if Azerbaijanis come back to their homes, which they have that right under international law, international ethics, morality, etc., that those people have a right to go back to their home, but they can't go simply there, right? They should be given political rights, guarantees for political rights, political integration, to be elected, to elect, etc., economic rights, security rights, and cultural rights, etc., a lot of stuff. But I think government's gonna speak about this sometime later. At this point, their relations should be normalized to that point to speak about that.
So on this same topic, this is my last question. How do you evaluate Prime Minister Pashinyan's course to grant Armenian nationality to the Karabakh Armenians? Do you agree with this approach?
You see, this is Pashinyan's policy, of course. I cannot object to that. But there is one problem, that if you grant your state's citizenship to someone, the guy, for example, is from Karabakh, that's a part of Azerbaijan, and you grant the same guy Armenian citizenship, then the guy should have dual citizenship, Azerbaijani citizenship and Armenian citizenship. And Azerbaijan's constitution does not allow this, okay? This is unacceptable. It means that if you grant Armenian citizenship to an Armenian coming from Azerbaijan, that person automatically gonna lose his or her citizenship of Azerbaijan. And Russia is doing that. In fact, that's politically very dangerous for Azerbaijan. Russia is trying to do that. There are a lot of Azerbaijanis living in Russia, millions of them. Russia wanted to grant them citizenship, then use them against Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan understands this, and this should be avoided.